Rome. The year is 390 BC. Imagine the silence after the screaming finally stops. What was once a collection of humble villages is now nothing more than a blackened skeleton of a city. Rome, burned to the ground by Gaulish warriors. For any other people in history, this would have been the end. A forgotten name, a footnote in a lost chronicle, but Rome was different. From these very ashes, they engineered a miracle, a return from death itself. In the centuries that followed, they didn't simply rebuild, they obsessed. They transformed ruins into the greatest city the world had ever seen. A vast, living megacity. 1 million people, 70 million subjects, 3 continents, all controlled from this single beating heart of stone and gold. To show you the true scale of this ambition, I have used cutting-edge AI reconstruction tools fed by centuries of rigorous archaeological data and historical records. We've rebuilt it piece by piece, from the drainage systems to the tips of the 10-story temples. Today, we aren't just looking at ruins. I'm taking you inside. We're going to walk the crowded streets, feel the shadow of the great monuments, and witness the raw power of a civilization that refused to stay buried. This is not just history. This is the story of humanity's greatest blueprint, the city that taught the world how to be an empire. Welcome to Rome at its absolute zenith. To understand Rome, we have to descend into its beating heart, the Roman Forum. This wasn't just a plaza. It was a high-stakes stage where the fate of millions was decided by the power of a single voice. Look at this building. This is the Curia Julia, the Senate House. It's one of the best preserved structures in the world, and for good reason. Imagine walking through those towering bronze doors. Inside, 600 senators gathered in a cavernous hall to debate the laws of an empire that stretched from the rainy forests of Britain to the scorching sands of Egypt. But power in Rome wasn't just about laws, it was about spectacle. Right here, on this stone platform called the Rostra, history was rewritten in blood. I've used our AI model to reconstruct this exact moment in 44 BC. Imagine the heat, the smell of the crowd, and the deafening silence as Mark Antony stepped up after the brutal assassination of Julius Caesar. He didn't just give a speech. He held up Caesar's toga, ripped by 23 dagger strikes and soaked in dark, dried blood. He read Caesar's will aloud, revealing that every single Roman citizen had been left a fortune. The crowd didn't just mourn, they exploded. They cremated Caesar's body right here in the dirt of the Forum. On that exact spot of ash and grief, they built a temple, declaring a mere man to be a god. But if the Senate was the brain of Rome, this was its soul, the Temple of Vesta. Inside, a sacred flame burned continuously for over 1,000 years. The Romans believed in a terrifying spiritual contract. If this flame ever went out, the empire would fall. To guard it, they chose the Vestal Virgins. Think about the contrast of their lives. These women were among the most powerful figures in Rome. They could own property and even pardon a prisoner on the way to execution just by touching them. But that power came at a chilling price. They had to remain virgins for 30 years. If they broke that vow, the Roman state didn't just execute them. They buried them alive in a dark underground chamber with nothing but a crust of bread and a lamp. A life of supreme privilege, or a death of absolute horror. That was the weight of Rome's survival. Now, look up. Towering directly above the Forum is Palatine Hill, the high ground of history. This is where the very word palace was born. If the forum below was the stage for the people, this hill was the private fortress for the gods on earth. In the beginning, the imperial presence was subtle. This is the Domus Augusti, the home of Rome's first emperor, Augustus. It was almost humble, a strategic mask of modesty. Augustus wanted to look like a first citizen, not a king. But as the centuries passed, that mask slipped, and the ego of Rome's rulers exploded into stone and gold. Centuries later, Emperor Domitian decided that modest was no longer in the Roman vocabulary. He built the Domus Flavia, a colossal monument to vanity. Imagine being an envoy from a foreign land, walking into a throne room where the ceiling vanishes into the shadows 30 meters above your head. Every inch was covered in rare marbles stripped from the far corners of the empire. This wasn't just a house, it was a psychological weapon designed to make you feel microscopic. But Domitian lived a double life. Right next to his show palace stood the Domus Augustana, his actual private residence. Here, hidden behind thick walls, were the bedrooms and private baths the public never saw. It was a city within a city. And then there's this, his own private 160-meter stadium. Think about the sheer decadence of this. The Circus Maximus, the largest stadium on Earth, was literally at the foot of his hill. He could hear the roar of 150,000 people from his balcony. But that wasn't enough. He needed his own world, his own races, his own blood sports, watched in total isolation. This is the ultimate contrast of the Palatine. The emperor was the most visible man in the world, yet he lived in a gilded cage, terrified of the very people he ruled. He had everything, yet he built a wall between himself and reality. While emperors lived in splendor on Palatine Hill, they slept with one eye open. Why? Because of the very men sworn to protect them. This is the Castra Praetoria, the massive military fortress of the Praetorian Guard. For centuries, Roman law strictly forbade any army from entering the city limits. It was a sacred boundary. But the emperors, fearing for their lives, broke that tradition. They invited the woe. Look closely at this soldier. How could you spot a Praetorian in a crowded Roman street? It was all in the details. While a regular legionary wore a helmet crest running front to back, the Praetorian wore his side to side, a horizontal blade of red horsehair that signaled elite status. Their armor was a masterpiece of intimidation. Silver scale plates that shimmered like a snake, and an oval shield emblazoned with scorpions and stars, the personal symbols of the emperor's shadow. They were paid 3 times more than ordinary soldiers. They were the untouchables of Rome. But here is the deadly contrast. The men paid to be the emperor's shield often became his executioners. The Praetorian Guard didn't just guard the throne, they owned it. They assassinated at least 13 emperors. In one of the most disgraceful moments in human history, after murdering Emperor Pertinax, the Guard literally put the entire Roman Empire up for auction. They stood on their fortress walls and sold the crown to the highest bidder, a man named Didius Julianus, who simply offered the most cash per soldier. Think about the symbolic rot here. These thick walls weren't built to defend Rome from foreign invaders. They were built to house the most politically dangerous force in the ancient world. The Castra Praetoria was a constant reminder to every emperor: you rule only as long as we allow it. In the heart of the world's greatest empire, the greatest threat wasn't at the borders. It was living right next door, sharpened and waiting. Rome was a miracle, but it was also a ticking time bomb. How do you keep 1 million people from dying of thirst or disease in a world without electricity? The answer is towering above the city streets. Look at the Aqua Marcia. This isn't just a wall, it's a 69-kilometer-long artery of stone carrying fresh mountain water from the Anio Valley. It enters the city on arches as tall as a 9-story building. Think about the engineering genius here. No pumps, no engines, just the relentless, invisible power of gravity and a precise 1% slope maintained over miles of rugged terrain. 190,000 cubic meters of water flowed into Rome every single day. This was the technological pulse that allowed a city of this scale to exist. But here is the brutal contrast. While fresh water flowed elegantly overhead, 90% of Romans lived in these insulae. These were the world's first high-rises, cheap, cramped, and terrifyingly fragile. Imagine waking up on the 6th floor of a building made of sun-dried brick and rotting wood. There is no running water up here, no kitchen, just a single, tiny room shared with your entire family. These buildings were urban tinderboxes. If a fire started on the ground floor, the narrow wooden stairs became a chimney of death. Collapses were so common that emperors had to pass laws just to stop people from building them higher. This was the daily reality for most Romans. The grandeur of the marble aqueducts above, and the stench and fear of the crumbling slums below. When the heat and the stench of the slums became unbearable, Rome provided a vent, the spectacle. This is the Circus Maximus. It's hard to grasp its scale even today. It seated 150,000 people. That's twice the size of a modern NFL stadium. They came for one thing, the most dangerous sport in history: chariot racing. Drivers hit speeds of 75 kilometers per hour with reins tied around their waists. If you crashed, you weren't just thrown, you were dragged to death under the hooves of 4 screaming horses. They called these crashes shipwrecks, and they were the main attraction. This wasn't just entertainment, it was an obsession that divided the city into 4 factions: the blues, greens, reds, and whites. Loyalty was so intense that it often ended in riots and thousands of deaths in the stands. But if the circus was about speed, the Colosseum was about the raw, cold geometry of death. Inside this arena, violence wasn't an accident, it was the entire point. Over 300 years, an estimated 400,000 people died on this floor. Gladiators, prisoners, and slaves. I want you to see the ghost in the machine. Beneath the sand was a 2-story labyrinth of tunnels. This was where hundreds of slaves operated 28 manual elevators. To the crowd above, a hungry lion would suddenly materialize from the ground, like a terrifying magic trick. The Romans never saw the machinery, only the spectacle. During the opening games alone, 5,000 animals were slaughtered in 100 days. Lions from Africa and bears from Germany were hunted to near extinction just to fill a few hours of bloodlust. This was the symbolic bargain of the empire. Rome gave you water to live and blood to watch. As long as the grain was cheap and the games were violent, the million people in this city would never turn their anger toward the emperor on the hill. Rome was a city of thousands of temples, but most are now just ghosts, stumps of marble in the dirt. However, there is one miracle that refused to die: the Pantheon. The name means all gods. It was Emperor Hadrian's ultimate insurance policy, a temple built to honor every deity at once. Step inside, and you're looking at an engineering impossibility. This concrete dome spans 43 meters, with no internal pillars, no steel, and no support. For 1,900 years, it has remained the largest unreinforced concrete dome on the planet. Look at the contrast of light. The only source of illumination is the oculus, a 9-meter wide hole in the center of the roof. When it rains, water falls into the heart of the temple, a symbolic connection between the heavens and the earth. The only reason this masterpiece survived while the great temple of Jupiter on the hill above turned to dust is a twist of fate. In 609 AD, it was converted into a church. It was saved by the very religion that replaced the gods it was built to honor. We often talk about the fall of Rome. But look around you. Did it really fall? Every time you walk into a multi-story apartment building, you are living in an insula. Every time you enter a stadium to watch a game, you are following the flow of the Colosseum. Our shopping malls are echoes of Trajan's market. Our very foundations are poured with concrete based on the chemical secrets the Romans perfected. Rome wasn't just a city, it was the first successful answer to a question we are still asking today. How do 1 million people live together in one place without it falling apart? They gave us the blueprint for the modern world. We've simply added more glass and steel to their original design. So, I have to ask, if you could be transported back to the peak of the empire for just 1 hour, where would you go? Would you risk the shipwrecks at the Circus Maximus? Or find peace under the eye of the Pantheon? Drop a comment below and let me know which Roman wonder fascinates you the most. And more importantly, what lost world should I reconstruct with AI next? From the Hanging Gardens of Babylon to the Pyramids of Giza, tell me where our next journey should begin. Thank you for watching the rebirth of the Eternal City. Don't forget to like and subscribe to keep the history alive.